Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving right into a massive, rapidly unfolding geopolitical crisis. This sudden and incredibly complex military and legal escalation between the US and Iran that kicked off this past July. This isn't just your standard foreign policy update. It's a really fascinating collision of high-stakes diplomacy, kinetic military action, and domestic constitutional law. Let's hook right into the core of this with a direct quote from a formal letter President Donald Trump sent to Congress on July 10th. He stated, "These strikes were limited, measured, planned, and executed in a manner designed to minimize civilian casualties." Now, that statement completely sets the parameters for our explainer today. We're looking strictly at the stated facts, official communications, and documented actions. This is the administration's official framing of these renewed military operations, and it's exactly what started the legal clock that's now ticking in Washington. Okay, let's dive into this. To really untangle this situation, we're going to break it down into 5 key parts. First, the ceasefire collapses. Second, escalation in the Straits. Third, the U.S. military response. Fourth, the War Powers Act. And finally, Congress and the standoff. All right, starting with part 1, the ceasefire collapses. You really can't understand the military strikes without first looking at just how fast diplomacy broke down here. Just weeks prior, on June 17th, the U.S. and Iran actually signed a Memorandum of Understanding. This MOU specifically required both nations to allow the safe passage of vessels, and it included an immediate ceasefire. But wow, did that unravel quickly. Between July 6th and 7th, Iran attacks neutral-flagged commercial ships. On July 7th, the very same day as those final ship attacks, the president officially declares the ceasefire completely over and orders military action. Then, by July 10th, formal notice hits Congress. In less than a month, we literally went from a signed diplomatic understanding right back to active military engagement. Moving right along to Section 2, escalation in the Strait. Now, these attacks didn't just happen out in the middle of nowhere. They happened in the Strait of Hormuz. And to put that into perspective, a staggering 20 to 30% of the world's total oil consumption passes through this single, narrow maritime choke point. Tehran has historically asserted control here and actively restricted commercial vessel traffic. When traffic stops here, you and I literally feel it at the gas pump. The U.S. response was explicitly framed around securing the safe passage of these commercial vessels and protecting national interests in this absolutely crucial bottleneck. And this brilliantly illustrates the severe, real-world stakes we're talking about. The conflict actually continued to escalate even after those initial U.S. strikes. On July 14th, the United Arab Emirates Ministry of Defense reported that 2 Emirati-owned oil tankers were struck by Iranian cruise missiles while moving through the southern shipping lane of the Strait. This wasn't just property damage, folks. There was a heavy human cost. 1 Indian sailor was killed and 8 others were injured. It just goes to show exactly how incredibly dangerous these waters have become for neutral commercial sailors. But keep in mind, the response to these provocations wasn't just kinetic. We also saw immediate economic retaliation. The U.S. Department of the Treasury stepped in and revoked its reauthorization for Iran to sell oil. So you're looking at a multi-domain escalation happening all at once. While the military is out there handling the physical security of the Strait, the Treasury Department is pulling economic levers to penalize Tehran for the collapse of that maritime safe passage agreement. Which brings us to Section 3, the U.S. military response. So what exactly did the United States hit when the president ordered action back on July 7th? According to the president's letter to Congress, specific targets included Iranian missile launch sites, air defense systems, military maritime assets, support infrastructure, and command and control capabilities. Now, the administration made it a very clear point to emphasize that United States ground forces were absolutely not involved in these operations. The focus was entirely on degrading the specific military capabilities that pose a direct threat to U.S. armed forces, our allies, and commercial shipping. And we need to be clear, this was not just some single isolated event. U.S. Central Command confirmed that a third night of strikes happened on July 13th. The stated objective here was to continuously degrade Tehran's ability to attack civilians and shipping in the Strait. The administration also noted that this followed earlier rounds of action back in June, specifically on the 11th, 12th, and 29th. So what we're seeing is a sustained rhythm of military engagement aimed directly at dismantling the hardware threatening the Strait. Pivoting back to Washington, D.C., let's look at Section 4, the War Powers Act. Because every single one of those missile strikes triggers a massive domestic legal requirement. We have to understand the rules of the game here. The War Powers Act of 1973 is a really crucial piece of legislation. It basically requires the president to report to Congress within 48 hours of deploying U.S. forces into hostilities. And that is exactly what prompted that July 10th letter we talked about earlier. The president initiated military action on July 7th, and in strict accordance with this law, sent formal notification to the legislative branch to keep them fully informed of his actions as commander-in-chief.
So the crucial point here, and the number you really need to remember, is 60. Once that formal notification is sent, a 60-day window swings wide open. Under the War Powers Act, Congress now has exactly 60 days to either officially authorize the military action or order its termination. The clock is officially ticking. The military might be actively engaging targets, but the legal foundation for continuing those operations long-term now rests entirely on what goes down within this 60-day countdown.
And that sets us up for our final section, Part 5, Congress and the Standoff. When you look at the political reality on the ground in Washington right now, the margins are just incredibly tight. Last month, the Senate voted on a Democrat-led joint resolution designed to prevent U.S. forces from engaging in further hostilities with Iran without congressional authorization. The split was 50 against the resolution, 47 for it, and 1 abstaining. Ultimately, that effort to halt the hostilities failed. What this neutrally means is that the president maintains the backing, or at least lacks the formal legislative opposition needed to continue the current military posture for the time being. Naturally, the administration was quick to highlight this outcome. On June 24th, President Trump posted that the Senate's action, failing to pass the resolution that would have halted hostilities, puts Iran on notice. The administration is pointing to this incredibly close Senate vote as a signal of domestic strength. They're projecting to Tehran that despite the obvious internal debate, the U.S. government is not going to pull the plug on these military operations via this specific legislative maneuver. And all of this leads us to a truly fascinating paradox. On one hand, you have the military reality. The June 17th ceasefire is officially, definitively over. Missiles are flying, and tankers are unfortunately being hit. But on the diplomatic side, the president has explicitly stated that negotiations for a longer-lasting resolution can actually continue. It's this complex dual-track approach, executing targeted military strikes to protect shipping, while nominally leaving the door open for diplomats to hash out a permanent solution. As we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought. We've got a shattered ceasefire, we've got a 60-day legal window ticking down in Congress right now, and we have commercial ships trying to navigate an increasingly dangerous strait. So what exactly happens to the Strait of Hormuz, and by extension global trade, if those negotiations don't resume before the legal clock runs out? It's a high-stakes puzzle for sure. Thank you for diving into this explainer with me today, and definitely keep your eyes on that 60-day clock.